watching that taking place. And as, this is my assessment, as 3CDC pretty much keeps them at arm's length, that parking garage is getting finished. That casino continues to roll on, and I know they just published some information about their use of minority and women business enterprises as contractors on the casino, but those numbers look good, but where are those contractors from? And what does their workforce look like? Those contractors' workforces, just because it's owned by a female doesn't mean that females predominate or minorities do. So there are many unanswered questions that arise too. So to go back to try and get at your question, I'd hesitate to try and be too precise about it, but it's like everywhere else. You got people who are passionate about where they live and keeping their community going, and a lot of people are unemployed. They want to have jobs, and the opportunities are not equally there for them. And institutions that use tax dollars should do a better job of providing those resources and those employment opportunities.
Can I just want to rebut that a little bit. I mean, the opportunities are not there for people in Over-the-Rhine for employment. How many millions of dollars have gone into those buildings? How many millions of dollars have gone into the renovation of Washington Park and the underground parking garage? And how many people precisely from Over-the-Rhine have been employed? I don't think...
You're not rebutting me. You're reinforcing me.
Okay.
I'm very unclear.
Right. Okay.
So I propose that we give our final two questioners a chance to pose their questions, and then we'll finish with the panelists' responses to both of those questions. Let's start there.
I'm Monica, and I'm a social work student here at UC, and I've been involved in Over-the-Rhine for about 5 years. And my question is, what policies can be put in place that reduce displacement and try to prevent displacement, and how do we, as a society and people sitting here with this knowledge, like what are we going to go out and do with this knowledge after this? Are we going to put it back in our binders, or are we going to do something with it? Like, that's what my teachers always say. So how can we support these problems, or not support the problems, support the answers?
You both mentioned not leaving affordable housing and gentrification to the marketplace in Over-the-Rhine. I'm curious about what percentage of units, or how many people would you leave below the poverty line in Over-the-Rhine, or how many units of affordable housing would you make?
In percentage, right?
Do you mean percentage or actual number?
Percentage.
Okay, so first question, what do we do? How do we support the answers? One, and this might sound too simple. I don't think it's too simple. You know, there was a time in our history, right? For example, when we had things like slavery, when we had other things like segregation. We eventually made those things illegal. We said, you know, not that they're not happening anymore, but we said it's no longer legal for those to happen. So one, we could simply say that it is illegal to remove one person from their home for another person to come in. We could do that. We could say that. Then you ask the question, well, what about, you know, it's one private company dealing with another private company. You know, one way to answer that is we don't privatize our government. We keep it beholden to the people. The other is, again, segregation, slavery. It was all private, right? There was a lot of private, not all private, but there was private people interchanging. So same sort of deal there. The other is, and I mentioned it this morning, some cities have legislation in which you say if public dollars are being spent to develop market rate housing, then a certain percentage of those dollars have to be spent on affordable housing, right? And so the question is, what is that percentage? Well, I don't know what the percentage is, because the way that you can set these up the best is that you make the percentage fluctuate. It goes with changing times. It goes with what the current need is. So the percentage sometimes is higher, sometimes it's lower, but there is a standard that public dollars are kept to. And I did, one other thing I want to add to this is we can also do, actually we've already done it. In the case of Metropole, 230 units, 208 people lived in them when 3CDC purchased them. We know for a fact that as tenants went to the relocation office inside that building, and the relocation people that were reporting to 3CDC worked to find them another home, they guided people with white skin to neighborhoods that were typically white, and they guided people with black skin to neighborhoods that were typically black. And by the way, if you were white, you probably got a car ride. If you were black, you got to ride in the bus. We know it happened. We talked to the people. That's already illegal. Resegregation is illegal. We can actually enforce what we've already got, instead of letting it go by and say, well, it's progress. It's all in the name of progress.
Very briefly, the challenge is that there are value disparities within this community, and the values that exist in the organizations that tend to be the structure of governments and most institutions are pretty firmly in place. And they're the kind of conflicts you see in Green Township, for example, on this issue of will there be low-income housing or Section 8 housing in the suburbs. Though that conflict represents the values of the people that live there. Not entirely all of the people, but the people who are there, those are their values and their ordinances or their obstinacy and resistance to change. So it's the question of how do you get a change in those values, and fortunately, I heard on the radio this morning that younger people have a different value set than old people like me. So the burden is on your back to get those changes made. Get organized, go to your city councils, go to your mayors, go to the institutions that are important.
Last comment? Okay, the next one.
Okay, yeah. So this is, of course, the question, what do we do? It's obviously a huge question. And now I'm speaking as a sociologist. Changing values is fine to try to do, but ultimately you need to have changes that are institutional and political in nature. My sense is that obviously inequality is in many ways the bigger problem than poverty, right? That is, it is the difference between the rich and the poor that is growing. You cannot solve the problem of inequality if you don't intervene into the market, right? So we need major efforts as redistributing resources. That means much more resources and advantages that are going to be universal, right? You need a tax code that do not favor those who have lots of money. Of course, those who have lots of money need to pay more taxes because the poor cannot, because they don't have enough money to pay, right? So obviously that's self-evident. But I mean, so at the big level, it's not a Cincinnati problem, right? It's a much, much bigger problem. Now that shouldn't be, that could be, of course, immobilizing because we can't change that today. But of course, at the community level, I mean, it's a much more tedious, cumbersome process. You need to have community involvement. But community involvement is difficult to implement. We know that from all the agencies that are required by the federal government to have community involvement. Well, you go to meetings, and then you have another meeting, and then there's different people who come to meeting, and then there's 3 years later, and you have a new generation of people who come, and no, I don't want this, and I want this. It gets difficult, but there is no way of bypassing it. We have to do it nonetheless, right? So that's not a solution, but at least it's a path.
Yeah, I don't think that policies, that seems like tinkering to me. I think we have to look at probably something that's more systemic as a structural change. But I will say that at one time in Over-the-Rhine, actually on the city books, there were two ordinances. There was the housing retention ordinance that doesn't exist any longer, and there was an anti-displacement ordinance where people could not be displaced from the neighborhood. Would have been great for the metropole because the people from the metropole could even relocate downtown. We could basically remove all affordable housing from the property tax rolls. You know, just that might be interesting. We could employ people